I've been away a little while, but Newcastle United are back. The international break is over. They face West Ham at home on Monday. But in this video, I'm going to be discussing the transfer situation, the landscape for January, and the bigger picture stuff at Newcastle at the moment. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. First of all, a very big apology from me for no videos over the last couple of weeks. I think you can probably hear it in my voice. I've been really rottenly ill. I missed an episode of Exploring Football last week. I was supposed to be at Harrogate Town against Chesterfield, missed that. I will be hopefully at Sheffield Wednesday against Cardiff tomorrow with another episode, so tune in for that. But we're back to talk about Newcastle United and talk about football transfers. Yes, it's coming up to that point again, and there's a lot of discussion around Newcastle and what they can do, what they can't do. The same topics are coming back up and lots of people are getting confused and frustrated, and I thought I'd just pop on and do an early video to give my thoughts and give an overview of the landscape of what you can expect from Newcastle in January perhaps, and also give a bit of context as to why these things are happening still and what's going on, and effectively prepare you for what could happen in January, because I don't think it's going to be as busy as people maybe hope it will. I'm not quite sure it'll quite be what it was last year, where they were really scared to do anything. I think it's a little bit less than that, but I do think it's not going to be quite as what people expected, and myself as well, I expected coming out of the summer, which was obviously a massive disappointment. So we'll get straight into that after a call. Once again, to like, share and subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate all of the support from Newcastle fans, but also across the board with Exploring Football started. I've got a Substack as well, which I've built here, which I'm building, so I'll link that in the description. Please go and subscribe to that as well. Help me grow this channel, and there's some exciting things that are going to happen over the next couple of weeks. I'm still thinking about how to start the podcast. There's a video on, hopefully a really special video coming next week as well, which I'm looking forward to. And a call to arms as well. Please get in the comments as well with your thoughts on the stadium, because I'm writing a piece for BBC Sports website over the next couple of weeks on the stadium and whether Newcastle should leave or stay at St James's Park. Obviously we did a live on that a few weeks ago, but we will get straight into the conversation about transfers. Now, the first thing to say is, what will Newcastle United target in January? They spent the majority of last summer really looking at a centre-back. They did start looking at a right midfielder. They had two distinct routes to go down last summer, and they really struggled to decide on which one. They started looking at the right winger, bidding for Michael Elise. They then went for Mark Gahey at centre-back as well, and everybody, including myself, had a lot of criticism for the way that it ended, because actually as well they then bid on the final day £50 million for Anthony Elanga in what was a really obvious panic move, and it sort of, I think that eroded a lot of confidence in this current ownership, in this current regime, for what Newcastle are doing. I've said so many times, since the takeover happened, especially in the first couple of years, they were so shrewd, they were so clever. They went and found Sven Botman for 32 million. They went and found Bruno Guimaraes at that point when they were really in deep relegation trouble. They went and pushed the boat out for Alexander Isak. They were clever enough and bold enough to go and get Anthony Gordon. Whereas this time, it didn't really feel like that they knew what they wanted to do. And ultimately, I think the big overview is that the plan hasn't really changed. The plan of attack hasn't really changed. That they're still going to look for a centre-back. They're still going to look for a right midfielder. And whatever the best option is on the market, they will probably look at going for that. The context around the centre-back's probably changing, because Sven Botman's nearly back from his ACL injury, and with that as well, Jamal Lascelles won't be too far behind, because he was only a couple of weeks after Botman injuring him back in the spring. And also that the defence has done really well this season. Dan Burns performed well. Fabian Schär's been generally very good as well. Lloyd Kelly's come in and been good when he's played, obviously that game against Chelsea. But also against Nottingham Forest, Newcastle, and against Arsenal, the right wing situation seems to have solved itself as well, because you've got Anthony Gordon playing out there on the right against Arsenal, started out there against Forest, and I thought he did really well. I've made a case for him playing on the right hand side in a recent video. And then against Forest in the second half, Joe Linton moved out there and performed really well and scored a goal in a really crucial victory. And what, as I said at the time, from the City ground felt like a really crucial win and a season turning game. And whether that'll make an impact on the January transfer plans, only a few people will know. There is a bit of context to this as well, that Paul Mitchell did talking as part of the board with the about a couple of thousand Newcastle fans in the stack outside St James's Park this week, and admitted that he got it wrong by coming in halfway through planned transfer window and trying to put his stamp on it. Whether it'll be different and whether it'll be a little bit more, less bullish, and lots of the talk about Eddie Howe and the relationship there, which we've covered extensively. I won't go into that again. Whether that'll have an impact again, who can say? It'll take time to realise. But I think the big picture, regardless of whether they go for the right hand side, regardless of whether they go for centre back, and actually this has been the case if you look across if you look across the summer, there is money to spend, there is scope to spend, but it will have to be for only the best players that are available for the right prices, because there will be consequences in terms of PSR down the line. And it does feel like, and has been said, that sales are inevitable. That has not really changed. As much as we like to talk about Bruno Guimaraes being part of the future and Alexander Isak being part of the future and Anthony Gordon being part of the future, I think Newcastle would love to keep all three of them, but it is getting to the stage where they might have to really clear out the PSR situation. They might have to sell one of those players. I spoke to a couple of people over recent months, and the context around the Guéhi sign was similar to that of Isak and Gordon. It's like, it's big enough to push the issue down the line and deal with the issue, and the hope was that they would deal with the issue a little bit better down the line than they did, obviously having to sell Yankuba Minter and Elliot Anderson. So there's a lot of context around how much Newcastle have to spend. It is hard to understand, because I struggled to deal with this as well in the summer. I think that money could have been spent differently. I still stand by that. I think there's much more clever, shrewd deals to do in cheaper deals to do on the continent, taking a bit more of a risk on players, a la Sven Botman, a la Bruno Guimaraes, as I've said so many times, than plumping 70 million or 60 or whatever there was that they were planning to spend on Mark Guéhi. The principle of going and signing a Premier League proven player, and I would throw Brian Mbeumo, who's another name that's been mentioned again in recent weeks, into this conversation. You're not going to get value for money, because Brentford and Crystal Palace have enough money, have enough strength of their own volition to hold Newcastle to ransom in those situations. There are other players out there in Europe that are much better value, and I keep coming back to it. And I know it didn't work out for him too well in the last game, but Nikola Milenkovic is a great example of a proven European centre-back with a lot of experience at the right age, and he cost Nottingham Forest an absolute snip. That is what Newcastle need to be looking at, and there is that sort of coming out from the board and from people around the club that they need to be a bit smart. I think the words are canny, shrewd, and other things like that. You know, they have to be cute in the market and clever. They have to get back to that, because that's what they were for the first 2 years. So it doesn't mean that they won't spend, it just means it has to be the right player. And I think that's kind of interesting that a lot of people, myself included, read it into the summer that they had a budget of 60 to 70 million because they offered that for Elise, they offered it for Guéhi. But I think it's less about what a budget is, it's about the money is there because Newcastle have riches ready to spend if they're allowed to. They'll only do it if they can justify the player, and they're trying to future-proof their defence and they're trying to add quality to their attack. I think they can do that different ways. I've said that myself before, but it does feel like a fear coming out that if they spend in January, then it pressurises them to sell in the summer. Maybe they'll go into the summer with a sale at the start to clear the PSR situation. The reality of the situation is, unfortunately, that if you look at the past with Aston Villa and Jack Grealish, the best example being Liverpool and Philippe Coutinho, you sometimes have to sell a big player to reinvest in the squad. Liverpool took the stride from selling Coutinho for 150 million to bringing in Alisson Becker and Virgil van Dijk. That's what won them the title. Obviously, we're not talking on the realms of that for Newcastle United, but it is a sense of like, maybe they do need to cash in on one of those players to reinvest across the pitch and also deal with long-lasting PSR issues. There is obviously the APT decision from the Premier League clubs to basically keep the status quo in place in terms of the fair market value and keep the structure in place effectively. So that isn't beneficial to Newcastle, who are one of 4 clubs, I think, alongside Manchester City, Nottingham Forest and Aston Villa, to vote against that. So Newcastle are in a difficult situation again coming into the transfer market. Yes, they will attack it if the right player comes available. They have to widen the parameters and widen the criteria for what is a right fit, because there are a lot of players in Europe who are a lot more cost effective than the players like Gahey and the players like Elise, and it felt like proven and Premier League quality was the mark of the day in the summer, as proven by the fact that they only really pushed for 2 players, and that was Elise and Gahey. They need to widen that, because it'll only put them under more pressure to maybe have to sell one of those players down the line. I'm not saying that one of those players is definitely going to go, and I think still is a desire on both sides to sign Alexander Isak to a new contract. Anthony Gordon's just penned a new deal. Bruno Guimaraes has obviously got a release clause in that deal, so he has been seen as the player that Newcastle have begrudgingly accepted might have to go in the past. Whether that's still the case, I don't know, but I'm not saying that one of them is definitely going to go in the next 6 months. I'm just saying that there is a lot of evidence to suggest clubs in Newcastle's position have sold cleverly and then reinvested cleverly. But it's about being clever. And my issue in the previous window and previous videos I've spoken about this is that Newcastle haven't been clever enough, both winning in players and letting players go. So I hope that that's a bit of an overview of where Newcastle are in coming into the January window. There is scope to spend. There's always been scope to spend, but it has to be on the player that they judge to be right, and then they'll take that risk with the PSR situation, as they did with Isak and Gordon, as they tried to do with Mark Gahey. It's not about a budget. Obviously, Newcastle's budget would be pretty much indefinite if they were able to spend that because of the wealth that they've got. It's just the rules in place. They've got scope to spend a little bit, but it will mean issues down the line if they do, and it just depends on who the right player is to spend that on. As I say, my biggest thing is widen the parameters of what qualifies as the right player, because there are plenty of players out here. I did an alternatives to Mark Gahey video in the summer in terms of the centre-backs. I've spoken widely about different right-wing options as well. There are plenty of players out there who could impact Newcastle United this summer. Obviously, there is talk of sales. There's talk of Miguel Almiron going again. Callum Wilson's contract situation. All of that's bubbling away. There's nothing new here, but I'm just trying to reinforce the current situation at Newcastle. If you want me to do a live stream on this and we can talk about the situation in more detail and we can have more discussion about it, I might do that next week. Like this video if you want to see that. Thanks very much for joining me. Like, share and subscribe. I will be back tomorrow from Hillsborough with a video on Sheffield Wednesday, and also a couple of exciting things happening next week as well. I'll see you later.